first 4 years of my career, I loved it. I was a patrol officer. I had full control over what I did with my time, how I treated my victims, how I treated my complainants. I was out in the community all the time. I loved visiting my schools. I actually worked in Cambridge, but I never had the pleasure of listening to your music. But I loved it. It was awesome. And then 4 years into my career, I was made a use and force instructor. So they said, hey, we want you to come and teach firearms and teach defensive tactics. We want you to teach conducted energy weapon, the taser. So I was moved up to headquarters. And to me, that's when everything changed. Now I worked out of headquarters. I saw the chief every day. I saw the deputies every day, the superintendents. Because I was a use of force instructor, I saw every officer at the service throughout the year. I started to hear conversations. I started to see business that was done at headquarters. I started to read headlines. So in the time that I was working at headquarters, I was reading headlines about an officer that had been arrested for sexual assault. It was not investigated by the Special Investigations Unit. It was investigated by his own service. I later found out the lead investigator was his ex-wife's supervisor from her shift. So he's thinking, you know, is there not a conflict of interest here? The lead investigator is getting all this information from my ex-wife on their shift, and now she's investigating me. He goes through a full 8-day criminal trial. He's emphatically acquitted by a judge that criticizes the investigation and says, how did we ever get to this point? So there's point number one, where I started thinking, this is odd, because we're police officers. This should never happen. We should always be doing things by the book. Everything that we do should be scrutinized and should withstand scrutiny. I realized I have to do something about this. I started looking at, what can I do about this? What can I, as a police officer, do to address this issue? So I looked, first of all, to our internal procedure at the service and found out that they don't even want us to complain. They didn't care. At the end of the day, I decided I'm going to make a presentation to my police service board. My police service board it's a group of elected officials who's responsible for the oversight of police in my community. And what I did is, May of 2016, I sat down at that table. I had the chief of police on my left, I had the 2 deputies on the right, and I had the board of directors in front of me. And I laid out very specific examples to them. And at the end of the meeting, I was approached by a woman that I didn't know at the time was from the media, but she ran up to me and said, are you some kind of whistleblower? And honestly, until that happened, I had never heard the term whistleblower. I didn't know what that meant. And I said, I know I'm not allowed to speak to the media. I said, I'm not allowed to speak to you, but you heard what I had to say. Let's see what the board does with the result of my delegation. So a week later, I was called into professional standards. And I was naive enough to think that they were actually going to care. I was naive enough to think that they were going to sit me down and say, look, we didn't realize this was happening. We want to make this right. What can you do to help us? Instead, I was sat down. I was served a notice of investigation. We're going to charge you with 6 Police Service Act charges. You're no longer a police or a use of force instructor. We're going to put you on administrative duties. You can't communicate with the board. And I was basically lectured at as if I was a 6-year-old child who was late coming home from school. And that was my first real experience of the power that they have as a police service. So, of course, in my nature, I sent an email to the members of the board to tell them that since I exposed these issues to you, this is what's happening to me now. The service is trying to charge me. As a result of that email, I was brought back in 2 weeks later, and I was told you're going to be charged with 2 additional charges, and now you cannot communicate in any way with members of the board. And the board is again, civilian oversight for the police service, and now I'm told I can't communicate with them whatsoever. So for the next 14 months, to summarize the next 14 months, I came into work at headquarters, sometimes seeing the chief on my way in the door. I had to pretend that I was okay. I had to pretend that I was okay with people passing me in the hallway and looking at me like I had the plague and not wanting to associate with me because I was the one that spoke out. That was the only difference between me and them. Everyone at my service knew that this was an issue. Everyone knew that they could be next on the pecking order to just be isolated, targeted, and sent out because someone didn't like you. But nobody was willing to stand with me. So for 14 months, I stood by myself advocating these issues. I did my human rights complaint. I did my workplace harassment complaint. I reached out to all these agencies again, the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, the Commission, anyone that I could, the Ombudsman of Ontario, and nobody gave a damn. So I was at a point where I had to decide what I was going to do. Because I came into this profession to try to make a difference, it obviously wasn't going to happen from the inside. Headquarters, I started researching, and I started finding how many people. I wasn't the first police whistleblower. There had been many people before me, and I started learning what police services were able to do with these whistleblowers. They were able to take them and make them look like they were such bad people and force them to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in finances to defend themselves in a case where they were only trying to do what they thought was right in the first place. At the end of the day, I wrote a 93-page research paper that I've since turned into a book, and I decided I'm going to send it to the people that need to know. I sent it to Trudeau. I sent it to Kathleen Wynne. I sent it to the minister responsible for policing. I sent it to Yasser Naqvi, who deals with, he's the Minister of the Attorney General. I sent it to anyone that I thought would care, and nobody cared. And I resigned at the end of June, and July 17th, I released my report to the media. And I didn't know if the media would care. I didn't know if it'd be anything that anyone would be interested in. The next morning, I sent it out at 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday evening, and the next morning by 5 a.m., my phone was ringing off the hook. And I had 570 News, I had CBC Radio, I had CTV News. It was all local media covered by KW, but people cared. People wanted to know, what are you telling us about police? What are you exposing here? The police service tried to say that I had written an opinion paper and that everything was false, but my research paper was basically a collection of cases from around the province. At the end of the day, I decided I'm going to start a business. I'm going to get into the business of ethical training and ethical consulting. I'm going to be the one to say, you know, if a police service can't even have this level of ethics, then let me bring this to your corporation. Let me bring this to your organization.